Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
Podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that prepares you for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, March 21st, and welcome to episode number 60, How Colleges View Homeschooled Applicants. In this week's news, we are following the breaking story of the largest college admission scandal that just came out this week. Some very rich people cheated to get their kids into these elite colleges, and they got busted. We're in chapter 60 of 171 answers, and we're talking about how colleges view homeschooled applicants. And this week's question is from an American mom of two college-bound kids currently living in Madrid, Spain, and she's seeking advice on the admissions process. And Mark continues his interview with Susan Tree this week in part 2 of writing the personal essay, Don't Miss Your Opportunity to Fill in the Gaps and Bring Yourself to Life.
Good evening, friends. If you missed the last 5 episodes, Anika and I are sharing results of a study at Cornell. 1,565-year-olds who shared their biggest regrets in life. And we're not doing this to try to be morbid or macabre. We're doing it so we can learn from them so we don't have the same regrets when we're 65. So Nika's learning about these at the same time as you are, and we're getting her on the feet reaction. So in recap, number 8 was taking care of the body. Number 7, not taking enough career risks. Number 6, not being honest in life. Number 5, spending too much time worrying. Number 4, not traveling internationally early in life. And number 3, not saying I loved you enough or at all to your loved ones. Anika, commentary, please.
What is the universe doing right now, Mark?
Uh-oh. Forget the universe. God. What is God speaking to you?
Ooh, I had a certain complaint from a certain spouse. I mean, it was kind of sort of a lighthearted joke, but now that you say that, oh my goodness, yes, say I love you to your loved ones, spouse, kids, parents, friends, podcast co-host. I love you, Mark. You're the best.
Thank you. Well, you know what? I mean, you never know when that's the last time you see somebody, right? And you don't want that regret. So, my dad, he's actually 90. He's like 10 years older than my mom. So I just got back from celebrating his 90th birthday.
Oh.
And he, he's just been an unbelievable dad to me. But, he's wasn't raised to be the sort of touchy, huggy, give you a hug, give you a kiss kind of thing. and so, but I know like every time I've seen him now for the last 5-6 years, I'm like, this may be my last time. So this last time on the 90th, like I gave him a little peck on the cheek and gave him a hug and told him I loved him. So I'm trying.
Well, I'm not touchy-feely either, and a certain spouse knows that. But I'm just...
All right, let's do personal. Let's move on. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right. Of course, we were previewed an article last week, but we know you've been listening to the news, to the breaking news, and the biggest college admission scam in history. And several news outlets have reported on this, of course, including New York Times and the Boston Globe. But one outlet, shout out to the New York Times, is featuring your favorite podcast co-host, Mark Stucker. It was so exciting. Mark, you are cited in this article. I was like, look at that Mark Stucker go. Woo! But that was awesome. It was an awesome article. There have been several. I've read several, of course, several headlines all over the place. So you want to talk about your experience first before we dive into this preview, or do you just want to dive into this preview? How do you want to do that?
Yeah, so I'm at a conference, and this is yesterday, Anika. It's called an organization called NCAN, NCAN, National College Access Network, and they deal with a lot of access and equity issues. So they had college admissions people there and college counselors, and they're all day, and we're literally talking about this issue, right? And giving our perspectives, and then I get a call. Of course, I'm not supposed to take a call in the middle of this, so I just ignore it. And then I see a message, urgent, call me. This is like one of my clients. So I stepped out and I called, and she's like, I just referred you to this reporter at the New York Times that wants to talk to an expert on this issue. So you need to take it like in 10 minutes because they're going to go to press soon. So then they called me, they interviewed me, and then they're very professional. So they said, we're calling you back, call me back to make sure all the quotes were right. And then they called me a third time just to make sure. And so and then it's funny. I said, "What is this article running?" And they're like, "Online in about an hour." and, and that was yesterday. And then they said the print version today. I still haven't even seen the print version because I'm in Atlanta. I don't want to get a New York Times, but I'll have to find out how to order it. And then of course it's just a lot of stuff. So and then tomorrow morning at 8:20, the BBC is interviewing me. That's going to be a radio interview. So obviously there's a lot of commotion around this. So what are your thoughts, Anika? Because I have opinions on this thing.
Well, let's do. Well, I know you do. So we've got. Okay, let's do this quick recap.
Yeah.
So you've got. We already know that there's about 50 people that have been charged across the country. For what authorities are calling it is the largest college admission scam ever. And so it includes all these about 33 parents. But central to this is this California businessman named William Singer. And so he's collecting all these bribes to get these students into these, elite schools. So, of course, a lot of the media attention is focused on these two famous Hollywood actresses, Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin. And they're just two of the parents, right? They're just two of the ones that they made payments ranging from $100,000 to $6.5 million to this man. And to make it even worse, like to put the cherry on top, they even claimed tax write-offs for these payments because what they did was they disguised them as charitable donations. So Tuesday this week, Singer, I'm just so anxious, and I haven't even gotten this far, Mark, and I'm sure you've seen it or may have seen it, how this was even tipped off. But this guy pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court in Boston this week to 4 felony counts of conspiracy to commit racketeering, conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and obstruction of justice. And not just him, more than a dozen college athletic coaches and associates of Singer's businesses are also involved. So, I'm, we know these things happen, Mark, and we know these secret societies are going on, but it's still mind blowing that these people in these reputable positions, these coaches, they're creating fictional athletic, stories for these kids that haven't even played the sport. It's bad enough that you're maybe not be that good in the sport. These kids haven't even played. They're facilitating cheating on SAT and ACT exams. So, man, and before you dive in, Mark, I just want to say the biggest question that is around this, and the one I'm anxious to hear answered, is what's going to happen to these kids that are in these schools on these campuses right now. The ones that got cheated into these campuses, what is going to happen? That's what I'm anxious to find out.
Well, great summary of the article. And Boston Globe broke this story, and it was a tip from somebody else, another investigation. But, before I said, I have to tell you another story. So I'm in that same conference, Anika, that I told you about yesterday. And I had another client. And by the way, thank you for all my people. So many people forwarded me stuff of this. You know what? I never have to worry that I'm ever going to miss this breaking news story. No, you guys were great. But this is so funny. This one client, she's like, I tell everybody I work with you, and they're asking me, are you working with this guy behind the operation? Is that your guy with the hookup? And I'm in the conference, you know what I mean? It's like kind of really serious. It took everything within me, like not to break out with the big guffaw. But I replied back, I'm like, they must think you roll like that, 6.2 million. Anyway, it's all good.
That is disturbing and hilarious.
All right. Let me get into it. I want to get to your question about the students. But I'll say a couple of things, Anika. The first thing that I will say is that the scandal did not surprise me. It did not surprise me. And actually, really, none of us at the National College Access Network Conference were surprised by this. Now, I was a little surprised by the amount of money some of the coaches were paid. I mean, Georgetown's tennis coach, $2.7 million. That's a lot of cheese. $2.7 million for a tennis coach. But I'm not surprised because every single area sort of that was exploited, I kind of knew was a weakness within the college admission system, right? So let's break them down. The test prep scam, right? So for those of you who didn't follow it that closely, which is probably not very many people in our audience, couple components to the test prep scam. One was having a substitute person come in and actually take the test instead of the person that actually did. Right. So that's been happening. I mean, was it 7 years ago? There was a big bust in Long Island where a guy was going in and getting paid $5,000 to take the test. And I mean, that was a huge controversy. So that's nothing new. I've also been a proctor, an ACT and an SAT proctor. And I mean, if you can get to the person, running the show, they can do some things. Nobody ever did that to me, everybody. I never cheated. Just get that out there. But I'm saying that's a flaw in the system, right? And Anika, and as much as I joke around with you, like I don't watch movies and all that stuff, I do have sort of one guilty pleasure sort of entertainment show that I do watch. And it's called American Greed. It comes on CNBC, and it's about all these scam artists, who did these scam things, and so people are susceptible when you throw millions in front of them. Like even the most ethical people, when you bribe them with that kind of money, like thoughts start going through their mind. So I've known that was a weakness, the test prep administrator. I remember a conversation I had with a parent, Anika, a long time ago, and they told me how they basically pretended that their child had some learning issues, got documentation from some therapist to get extended time on their SAT to increase her son's test scores. And they went up 400 points on their SAT. Yep, they sure did.
My goodness.
So I've known about that scam. And then the whole athletics is just rife with potential fraud and abuse because you've got a couple of things going on there. At a lot of colleges, coaches actually get slots. You know what I mean by slots?
Your positions, like literal slots for kids to fill in, right?
Yeah. So when you get slots, basically, as long as somebody graduates for the most part, right? They used to have some it's really, really, really minimal standards to qualify. Like, I mean, really low GPA. This is so basic that 98% of the population qualifies. And then you have reserved spots. And then you just go to admissions and tell the people, these are the people I want for my slots. And if they graduated from high school, basically you get those slots. You have to go through the NCAA Eligibility Center, formerly known as the NCAA Clearinghouse. But trust me, it's not hard to qualify. So you can see the power the coach has in that kind of system. Right. And even where coaches don't get slots, what generally happens is that there's an athletic liaison in the admission office who's the go-between between admission and the coaches. And you get priority recruits. And, we're going to get all of this when we cut next episode 74. We get in the hook. So I won't get too detailed into this. But either way, that is a big weakness within the system. And so none of that surprised me. So that's my first thought. What about you? Were you surprised or not?
I mean, I honestly, I was there with you for a second, but I'm going to tell you, though, the media attention has been off the chart. So I'm just like, man, yeah, you're right. This is crazy. But I mean, this is nothing new, privilege and, classism and rich people doing crazy things. That's nothing new. And we know that. But it's still, when it hits home this close, I guess, is when it just is more of an eye opener, I guess. And the responses, I think, and my I guess most heartfelt reaction is to these kids that are responding to the issue. And that's where a lot of these journalists are going with this, is that they're interviewing these kids that don't have that opportunity. They don't have that type of money, who are working their butts off trying to get into these institutions, and they're not making it in. And they are really spinning that angle on this story. And that's what's most compelling to me, because you're hearing from these kids who are shocked and surprised. And for me, us as adults, we've been through this, done this. And so we know, and of course we're not shocked, but these kids are. And so that's, I think, where it kind of brings it back to an emotional moment for me, or more of a shocking kind of moment, because our kids are affected by it so much.
Well, so that's true. And I don't know if you knew this, Anika, but there's federal investigation right now into a Florida businessman who paid a UPenn basketball coach $74,000 to get his kid on the team. So it's just hasn't been wide scale, but that's going on as we speak.
Right.
But yeah, but one thing I'll say, there's lots and lots and lots of very, very, very opulent, rich people that aren't running scams, right? And they're not doing scams. And so it's not just that. So the first thing I will say is I was not surprised. I other than the sheer amount of money that like the tennis coach got. Yale soccer coach, $400,000, the stuff that went on at USC, Stanford, U Texas, U San Diego, Wake Forest. Those are the main schools that were listed. Now, another thing that I'll say is, and this is one of the reasons why I think this is stirring up a lot of controversy. There has been a widespread perception that college admissions is a meritocracy, and I don't believe that it's a pure meritocracy. Even my good friend Dave, we had him on the show, multiple interviews the last few weeks. He'd be the first to say when I talk to him that he's not under any illusion that if he didn't have a lot of the advantages he had, his daughter wouldn't be going to Yale. So I'm not under the perception. And Nika, what do you think we've talked about more than any one thing, or at least me, in terms of on this podcast? Do you remember me talking about a New York Times study where 38 colleges have more students coming from incomes of $630,000 than they do from incomes under $65,000? I must have brought that up 7 times. And so what does that say? It says that unless you believe that talent only resides in a certain zip code, I mean, the fact that you could have these 38 schools that have more kids from incomes of over $630,000 than they do under 65, it shows how many ways the system has preferential treatment toward those who can not necessarily bribe, right? But those who have the means to do every single thing, from put yourself in the best schools to hire the best tutors to test prep. I mean, if you can afford to spend $10,000 a year from the time your kid, let's call him little Johnny, is 3 years old to the time he's 18, that's 15 years at $10,000 or $150,000. So little Johnny can become a coveted oboist or bassoonist or a talented French horn player. You're going to like the impact this will have on little Johnny's college options, but you need to have the $150,000, and that's just for this one expense. And that's just, but that's just the reality. Like, I mean, I'm a college coach, so I help people and I teach people methods and things. So there's just advantages that are there if you have, and guess what? God bless you if you have those resources and you care enough about education to invest it in your kid and do it the right way. I commend you for that, because you could just be gambling in Vegas, or you could be trying to buy a yacht. No, seriously. It's because you love your kid.
Right.
Everybody, like, you're not doing anything any different than somebody who makes $30,000 would do if they could. Right. And so one of my favorite things, Anika, was this article that came out in Vox. And it's a really good article. And the title of it is "The Real College Admission Scandal is What's Legal." And it basically goes through all the things that are legal, right? So let's just talk about this guy. Like, this guy kind of knew some things and how they work, to be really honest. I mean, now they're calling this thing Operation Varsity Blues, but I'm calling it Operation Side Door Hustle. That's what I'm calling it, because this guy had a pitch, and the FBI wiretaps exposed his pitch, and basically what he would say is, look, there's 3 ways to get into a college. You can get in through the front door, which is the way all of our listeners are trying to do, right? Trying to figure out, what do I need to do with my grades, my recs, my scores, my activities, and everything else to give myself and give my kid the best chance coming through the front door, ethically, morally. He said that's going to be extremely hard at these schools with low acceptance rates. He says you could come in through the back door, which is the development or the advancement angle. He said, but guess what? That's going to cost you 10 times what you have to pay me. And there's still no guarantees. So if you want to drop 10, 20 million, then it may work, but it may not. Or you can come through the side door, which was his hustle. And what I offer is a guarantee. I hate to say this, but from a pure sinister standpoint, that was a pretty slick hustle. Because the coaches, like tennis coaches don't get paid a lot at Georgetown. They just don't. So you go, you're giving a guy more money than he'll make in his entire lifetime. Like, he's not the only one that's going to succumb to that level of bribery. I'm not defending it. I'm not defending it. Please think I'm not.
I understand. No. We know that. But what I've been trying to butt in.
Oh, sorry.
I'm glad I did. No. Because you did. No, because you just answered my
Okay.
question, because that was my point. And I think that was the most shocking part for me in all of this is that, man, can't imagine what $50,000 worth of test prep would have done? Like, what if they would have spent that money on actually building their child's skills as opposed to cheating? And so that for me, I was like, why did they choose that? Like, you could have bought your own experience. Like and isn't like being a celebrity kid a
It is.
hook? I know it's
No,
only
it
two of
is.
them, but
So,
still.
so,
I mean,
so,
you know what I'm
so,
saying? So it's just like that money could have gone for not total good, but much
yeah, but here's
better.
the thing, Anika. Like the most selective schools turn down kids all the time with perfect test scores. So that's not a guarantee. Getting a perfect test score is not a guarantee. So he was
Well, but that's not, but the amount of money though, I'm just saying that could have been one check. Okay, got test scores
right,
check.
right,
You know what
right.
I mean? Okay, now we got our other hook. We're celebrity kid, just using
No,
those two
yeah,
again as an example. Celebrity kid
right.
check. I could have bought a building and actually, made a super impact on this university. Check. Like it's so many checks that could have went down that list, as opposed to let me just pretend like my
Well,
child is playing
it
a sport
actually
that she's
speaks
not
to a
playing.
level of
We would like to
entitlement.
thank every listener who has financially supported our show.
We want to make sure that our friends of the show know that you absolutely can make a one-time gift, or you can sign up for one of our monthly giving levels. Recently, we received a lovely letter from a college counselor who made a gift and said she wants to support the show quarterly, and that is also okay.
And if you make a one-time gift or a quarterly gift, you may still be entitled to the same benefits we extend to our monthly donors.
That's right. For a gift of $60 or more within the first 12 months, you'll get all the benefits we provide in our Sustainer plan. And a gift of $120 or more in the first 12 months, and you'll get all the benefits we offer in our Expander plan.
So to support the show, all you have to do is go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. Either click the monthly gift tab or the one-time gift tab.
And be sure to visit our frequently asked question page, which is also located at yourcollegeboundkid.com for more details. This is also where you can learn about the Sustainer plan and the Enhancer plan.
Your financial support helps us defray the sizable expenses that it takes to deliver all of this great content that is aimed to empower you and your family's college admissions journey.
Different people have different abilities to give, but whatever you can contribute will be greatly appreciated, and it will allow us to remain commercial free. So thank you in advance.
Thank you.
Those who didn't follow the story really closely, I mean, they went to the level where they actually learned how to Photoshop and put your face on it, make it look like you're doing crew or doing water polo or something, right? But this guy had, this guy had a criminal mind, because he thought of all the different weaknesses in the system and he exploited them. But you know what? There is one thing I want to say, Nika, and then I want to get to your question. So while it's true that it's not a meritocracy, like, what in life really is a perfect meritocracy? Like, we don't live in this society where everybody gets equal chances. Like, that's utopic. But let's take, for example, getting a job. Is that a meritocracy? No. A book came out in 1980 called Preparing for Power, about 16 boarding schools, including where Jalen went, by the way, is in that book. Woodbury Forest, which I don't know if you know this. Do you know Beto O'Rourke went to Woodbury Forest, Anika? Yes, he did.
I did not know that, but he so looks like a Woodbury man.
So this book came out, right? Preparing for Power. And basically what it says is these 16 boarding schools are where elite parents send elite kids so they can have connections and hookups for the rest of their life, so they don't have to compete for jobs with the average Joe. And so the point I'm making is, what in life truly is a pure meritocracy? But that's the myth. The myth is that college admissions, other than some athletes and other than maybe some affirmative action projects, is kind of a level playing field. And I think that's why the public is so aghast, is because it's exposing this.
All right, so let's get to this, because we can go on all night about this thing.
I know. This is not this scandal, though, is not a scandal of the day, not a week of the month, not of the year. We'll be talking about this for decades. So I think it did warrant a little longer section. But I know I haven't even answered your question yet, have I?
Right. These kids on these campuses, what do you think is going to happen?
So here's what I think is going to happen. This is just my prediction. My prediction is that there's going to be an outcry from the rest of the students, alumni, and powerful stakeholders, including some parents who are connected to the school, to oust them and boot their butts out, because they're really hurting the brand of the school, right? They really are. And so I think you're going to see that play out, where there's going to be every attempt possible to tell them they got to go. Now, that is fraught with difficulty because that's going to invite a lawsuit. And schools I've experienced this. Schools are very reluctant when it comes to lawsuits, especially with people with deep pockets, because that's going to cost you a lot with attorneys. And it will be all over the news for months with the lawsuit and the publicity it will generate. So now, one of the things, Anika, you probably heard this. People say, well, some of the kids didn't even know what was going on. And I am very, very, very cynical about that. I'm not saying there's not occasionally one or two, if the test person came in and took the test behind them and they didn't know. But come on, man. I mean, that celebrity, that one, I don't know who these people are. I don't follow that stuff, so I never heard of them, but you probably did.
Right,
the one that got into USC saying that her kids did crew.
Right.
Now, come on, how can you not know that you don't even do crew?
Right.
You don't even do crew. Come on. So okay, this guy, Mr. Singer, he said he's done 761 of these side door gigs. And so that's, now I don't know if he's just bragging to try to recruit people, but that's what he was saying on the wiretap. So maybe there are a few that didn't know, but most of them knew, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. So I think that's what's going to happen. But I think that might only happen if they can prove that the kid knew. I think if there's no documentation that the kid knew, if they just said, okay, they had somebody come in and take the test, maybe there's a possibility that they'll leave the kid in. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm with you. It's now you did bring a different angle, because I was thinking that the kid probably didn't take the test at all, and somebody wouldn't took the test. Because I was going to say, okay, somebody took your test and you have an SAT score, so really you didn't know you didn't take the SAT test. But I don't know. It's just really because these kids are interacting with these admissions officers, right? They're showing up on these campuses, like, okay, you play, or I don't know if play is the right word, but crew or whatever, soccer or whatever. So did you not show up to the field? You received a letter that said, welcome to the team. So did you not know that you were on the team? So it's hard for me to believe that those kids didn't know.
I agree.
And Mark, I'm going to say, and I feel like that's that privilege rearing its ugly head again.
I agree.
Like if that was a bunch of, I'm just going to say it, if it was a bunch of kids from a different class and a different race, and they made it through that system, whatever way they made it through, those kids would be like, yeah, of course you knew that. Like, you're not an idiot. I mean, I just feel like I feel like that's that privilege again. Okay, you got these privileged kids that you're going to protect, and that's the way I'm calling it. I'm sorry.
Now, I do think there are going to be some other changes that are going to happen as a result of this, Anika. Can you think of any other changes that you can foresee?
Let me just tell you. So John has to do my 10-year-old has to do a current event every week. Mm-hmm. Of course, what current event did we do this week? Of course, we did this article.
Of course. Hey, you're getting them ready.
But part of that assignment was that he said he has to predict what's going to happen. And so I asked him, I said, John, what do you think is going to happen to these kids? He said, well, I think that they're going to evaluate them based on how they're performing. If they're doing good, they might keep them. And if they're doing bad, they're going to kick them out. I thought that was just so awesome. I was like, John, you are just the man. That's people are going to my kid. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know.
I think you're going to see some more things. So one of these kids had a 400-point jump from their PSAT to their SAT. You may remember this, Anika. You probably do, because now you've had both Janae and Jalen do this, even though they're both at boarding school. So in the 11th grade in October, every student takes the PSAT in class. It's standardized.
Right.
So there's no opportunity to send your ringer in there to take the test for you, or to have the proctor change the answers.
Right.
And so I think schools might look at that like, okay, you went from 1,000 to like 1,450. Like,
right.
Well, I'm not saying they'll automatically say you cheated, but there's gonna be a lot more scrutiny on that. Another thing is there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on coaches earmarking kids. That's going to be put through multiple levels of filters. There's no question in my mind you're going to see a lot more filters and accountability with coaches, who they're brought in, how easy they can get somebody through the admission office. And also there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on whether this is directly related to this is tangential, and that is big donors giving big gifts. Because even just today, Nika, I saw some legislation come from some congressmen to try to crack down on basically people buying their way in through buying buildings and stuff. I also expect another prominent school or two to drop the SAT and ACT requirements. A lot of schools are teetering on the fence of making this decision now. So this incident just may be what pushes them over the edge. So stay tuned, because this story is not going anywhere. And keep in mind, we've talked about this a lot. This is all coming at the time when there's a lot of brouhaha over income inequality. You got the greatest income inequality since the Depression, top 1/10 of 1% making the same as the bottom 90. And so there's already a lot of energy along these issues. So this just fits right into the zeitgeist.
Woo, let's get on into this chapter, Mark.
All right. Because we could be here all night and you'll be snoring. You'll be snoring on me. Yeah, but we'll come back. When I have this interview with the BBC, maybe we'll put it in the show notes. It's supposed to be an audio interview. We'll maybe link that. We'll see. Depends if it goes well. He's interviewing me tomorrow on that.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right. So friends, first-time listeners, I wrote a book called 171 Answers, and we go chapter by chapter through the book in the second segment of the podcast, hitting on a few key points. And so, it's the reason it's called 171 Answers. It's just I take the 171 most frequently asked questions I get, and I answer each one in a chapter, and people use it as a reference book. Go to the front, figure out what questions you want, go to that page, and presto, there's your answer. So this chapter in the book is entitled, How Do Colleges View Homeschool Applicants? Anika, did you learn anything in reading it, and what do you want to share?
Of course I learned something, because I'm not a homeschooler. I am so fascinated by that community, because I just could not imagine trying to homeschool my kids. But so the fact that there is this community of homeschooled children we have one. I know of at least one in our family who she is brilliant. Like she is just brilliant. So I totally got what you were saying, where, these kids are known that they have a demonstrated track record of just like blowing it out of the water. Like they have higher graduation rates. They do well on the test. The schools are reporting them as more innovative thinkers. So that, I didn't necessarily, I kind of knew that based on my experience with her, as a family member, but that was just one person. So, you just kind of, underscore.
You got to be careful with those samples of one, and I get you in trouble.
But I'm saying what you said about, what you were saying in general is what she is. And, she's like, and I'm sorry, I got a neighbor in Atlanta. He was brilliant too. So, that was the trend, was keeping with the people that I know. But the fact that, the schools, they have homeschool applicant guidelines. Like you need to go in and read what they say about homeschooled applications. And one that was kind of funny to me is that you were suggesting, where you recommended that the child gets a recommendation beyond their parents. And I'm like, man, the parents can actually write a recommendation. That's so funny. That's legal, but they're the ones that's teaching them, right? Yep. They're the ones that's teaching them. And then there's a thing, get involved with outside organizations. That makes sense. Show them that you still engage with, the outside world. But here's one question I do have for you, Mark. One of the things that you suggest on here is that you consider that these homeschool children, or excuse me, let me stop calling them children. These homeschool students consider taking summer classes in a traditional school or online course. Now, again, I don't know much about homeschool curriculum. So, but I thought that a part of those curriculums were I thought that there were some that were built that parents could actually follow, that were online or whatever, that they can go engage in these national things or whatever. So I thought that was already a part of that process anyway. When you're homeschooling your child, you already have access to those online things. So is that not always the case?
Not always, but so let me say a few things. So the homeschool community is growing. Growing really faster than really any other community out there. And there are now over 2.5 million students. And One of my friends who was a director of admission, he's not anymore, but he did it for a long time. And he used to always say to me, Mark, there's a war for talent out here. And basically what he means is I'm looking under every nook and cranny I can to find talented kids. And so that's the mindset that a lot of colleges have. Like, we can't ignore a community that's growing, that's 2.5 million strong, that have higher SAT scores, higher college GPAs, higher college matriculation rates. Like, there's talent there, and we got to tap into it. But one of the questions always about homeschools are, one, what is their curriculum, right? What is their curriculum? And two, what are their social skills like? Because, just because you can do well on the test doesn't mean you can relate to anybody. So some of the things that people definitely want to do are, like, you want to take those AP exams, those SAT subject tests and things like that, because those are standardized national curriculums that colleges respect. And if you can do well there, you'll be able to convince them that the curriculum was strong. So that's kind of important. And it's also good if you can get involved in organizations. Like, it could even be like athletic teams. Some, teams like that, work, anything like that, where you can have an outside recommender that can speak to your social skills and your interaction, because that, you don't necessarily have a standard teacher environment to provide, academic references. Now, these homeschool communities have gotten a lot more sophisticated and a lot better than they've ever been. Because, like, when I grew up, Anika, homeschooling meant that mom taught you. That's kind of what it meant. Now, I'm seeing really creative things. So now what's happening is, like, a consortium of like 12 parents are like getting together, and they're saying, okay, that retired physics professor who used to teach college, who's now 72 and at home, he's willing to teach physics. And they're tapping into all these professionals in different areas. And so you can have a bunch of different teachers, and even sports teams. They're even playing in sports leagues now.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
yes. But it's very important, back to this, it's very important, if you're a homeschooler, check the websites of each college, because they oftentimes will detail their homeschool policy. Like, sometimes they will have an additional requirement on there. It's very common for them to have additional requirements for homeschool apps. So it's extremely important that you check the policies of the websites and see what, unique and specific requirements that they may have. But in general, think about bolstering your academic credentials through outside arbiters that are respected, and also you want to let them know that you're not like socially, a loner, risky kid, right? You want to make sure that you convey that you can relate well to people. It's not that they don't think you can; they just don't know you can, because they don't have as many ways of validating it.
So you mentioned that in there, Mark, that some schools are a little more leery than
Yes.
others. So how do we know if I'm approaching a school that they have that perception of a
That's a
homeschool
fantastic question.
applicant?
That's a fantastic question. One of the things I would do is that's a great question for your admission officer. What's been your perspective and your history with homeschool applicants? Now, it is also one of those kinds of things where you may get a fairly politically correct answer.
Right, of
But I will
course.
also say this: these homeschool communities are really tight and they're close, and there's a lot of chatter that goes on amongst them, as they share experiences where kids get in. So I would tap into the homeschool networks. But there are schools, and I mentioned some schools in this article. I don't know. Do you remember any of the ones I mentioned, Anika, that are known to be extremely pro homeschool? And that will come through. I mentioned Dartmouth, Amherst, Brown, just to name a few of the highly selected. Oh, I have a question for you, Anika. Why do you think, and it's not everybody, but why do you think so many homeschool kids do well?
Well, it's personalized attention. That's why we want small classroom sizes. In public
Hmm.
schools, we
Hmm.
want that personal attention, that customized attention to our kids. Like, that's the ideal situation. Now, for me personally, again, I just can't imagine being in that role, but I can imagine my child getting that level of attention. I mean, I can't say it enough. I mean, you really are able to dig deep into what those needs are, where the weaknesses are. I mean, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense why they do so well.
So I think that's one of the reasons, and it's a very important reason. But another reason, and you know how much we've talked about this on the show, Anika, the correlation between having highly educated parents and all the advantages that that gives a kid, right? Just your parents are your primary teachers. So if you grow up from the time you're
Right.
1, 2, and 3 around highly educated parents, you just have different conversations. You have different levels of exposure when it comes to international travel, who their friends are, what conversations you hear, what norms are modeled before you, and all of that. So these homeschooling population in general is a higher educated population and a more affluent population. It's
So
oftentimes a
you're saying,
population where the mom doesn't have to work. I remember one
okay,
mom, and she was highly educated, college professor she
okay,
used to be, but she didn't like what she saw going on in the school, so she felt I can do this myself. And she was taking her kids to every museum you could possibly. I mean, I never saw so many field lessons I've ever seen. It was amazing. But she created
right,
this whole curriculum. So anyway, you're going to say something
right.
like a second ago.
No, I just wanted to verify that because is that typically? I wanted to know what that profile of that parent looked like
Yes, yes.
because
Lots of
again,
masters and PhD degrees,
yeah,
lots of
okay.
professional parents, lots
See,
of
that makes
lots
sense.
of uh I mean it's not always because sometimes dads are at home. But more often than not the mom's home, but sometimes dads. But lots of times you have one parent who is a high wage earner that frees another parent up to just strictly just be a teacher and not have to be concerned with making money at all.
Mm-hmm.
hmm So, you got a
Okay.
parent that can say, hey, let's go to Smithsonian, hang out for a week, stay in hotels, and we'll do all that. And then I'll teach you. I mean, you have that type of flexibility when money's not an issue.
That explains it.
I'm not trying to make it sound like everybody's affluent because, you also have sort of a religious homeschool community that's large that tends to have a lot more diversity within its socioeconomic population. It doesn't want their kids
Mhm.
to be corrupted by public school values. So I don't want to make it sound like everybody's just rolling in and out there.
But they're rolling in something, whether it's in their faith or in the money. They rolling deep in something, right? It's not just
They're
Anika,
rolling.
"Oh, I just don't feel like taking the kid to school today. Let's
You
call it a
know.
homeschool."
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, this week's question comes from Miss Carolina in Madrid, Spain. And I'm going to read this, Mark. Hi, Mark. I'm a mother of 2 college-bound kids, senior and a junior, but we are American expats living in Madrid, Spain. Since all of the universities are considered out of state and the tuition fares are about double, could you please do a podcast that addresses the specific concerns of this type of student? Addressing affordable universities, not being able to visit colleges to find the right fit, search engines that are not adaptable, and our school has no ranking or GPA, and my kids are in the IB program. Thanks for all you do, Mark. And we thank you, Carolina. So, Mark, that was a lot. Where shall you start?
Yeah, so let's talk first of all, because it may be a term that our listeners aren't familiar with, the term expat, right? These are just referred to as expats. And what they are Americans who are living abroad in another country. A lot of times they work in foreign service. There's a lot of reasons why, you're the government or corporation company, has you stationed overseas. But you're really an American. And so the first thing to understand is there are a lot of similarities between the process for an American who's specifically looking at going a long ways away. You're a U.S. citizen, so you are eligible for the financial aid programs that U.S. citizens are able to tap into.
That's good.
So that's important. Now, sometimes expats have dual citizenship. Okay. And it is extremely important, if you have dual citizenship, make sure that you put down your American citizenship. That would be very important. This is just a basic. There are some other concerns though you need to be aware of. Like sometimes there's concerns with it and be more difficult to take the SAT and the ACT, for example, because while it's offered internationally, it's not offered as many times. And you have to travel more. So that kind of stuff has to be planned out in advance. A lot of times the school you're in may not understand the American system, right? And so it's important that you sometimes have to educate the counselors at your school about the American system and make sure that they include really clear information when it comes to things like the grading and offering the support materials that are there. Financially, you may be able to get more money if you qualify for financial aid, need-based aid, by having an additional travel allowance. That's something that can fall under a category of what we call professional judgment. A lot of times you can talk with the school and say, listen, it's going to cost me like, $1,500 a ticket, and I got to do this thing 4 times and blah, 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 and so if money's involved, that's the kind of thing that sometimes you can speak to financial aid and have a package altered. It's important that you start discussing the process earlier than a lot of students because of all the planning that's involved in the process. If you can come over for a summer to get to know the school, because sometimes these are students who the student just shows up sight unseen and you're not unable to do college visits. And so it's really important that you tap into all of the internet resources, the kind of resources that we share all the time in our recommended resource section. So you learn all the ways that you can learn about the school from a distance. And most people, when they realize all the ways that are available to them, they begin to feel a lot more empowered. There's a lot more I can say, but what are you thinking, Annie? Because I know that mind is percolating over there.
No, I think that was great, and I do, and I was thinking that I was like, man, that internet's got to be popping. Like they really got to get into those virtual tours and just really those online newsletter, the article, which tells to look at the newspapers that the schools produce, and just to get the most genuine feel of the school that you can. So, Carolina, I can only imagine. I mean, it's hard for me, and I'm here.
Yeah, and one thing that can be tricky too is if if you're trying to get in-state tuition, it can be difficult for you to be considered an in-state resident. That's going to be case by case whether a school will look at, let's say you moved from Texas and that's still what you consider your home, and you're stationed abroad. That can be challenging, and that's policies are going to vary a little bit school by school in terms of how difficult it is to get an in-state type of tuition if you're looking at public schools, versus looking at private schools.
Right.
I mean, the process can be overwhelming for Americans. So when you add in this factor, especially the fact that you're not able to easily visit, oftentimes that can add an element of stress.
All right.
But being in communication with the admissions officers at your school is essential in these instances.
Yeah.
These are times you really, really, really want to build rapport with somebody in the admission office and financial aid office if you feel you're going to qualify.
Yep.
What did you learn? Anything?
Everything. Mark, I'm struggling in the United States. You know that.
you and everybody else, Anika, you are not alone. This process is just a little too complex at times to do it right.
And let me stop saying struggling. Because I'm so not struggling.
Go.
It's just a lot. And when you have more than one kid, it's just, you get into your feelings sometimes. That's all.
And you also have a professional job that, demands a lot of hours and 3 kids and a husband and everything else. So
you're that life. Yeah.
Yes. And you're over there and you're involved in your church and everything else. So, but hey, are you running still?
I am. Yeah.
That didn't sound like the old Anika runner.
It's definitely not the old Anika runner.
Belly?
It's not the old Anika runner, but the old Anika runner is coming back. Let me say that.
You doing your 5-6 miles Saturday morning?
Oh no.
No? Okay.
Out the window.
You said that with conviction. What about, are you doing any like 5K, 10Ks, any of those kind of things?
No, it's funny because first of all, I miss my running community, period. Like it's a totally different running. Like there is the running community here does just not compare. And I'm sorry, North Carolina. It's just you just got to hear that. Okay. And yeah. And
you're always welcome back in the ATL, just so you know that.
Oh, don't be surprised. Sorry, Carolina. We didn't mean to digress on your question.
Okay.
Good luck to you. You're going to do well. We know you are. I love it. And I love the fact that you were in the New York Times, about to be on this BBC. It's just so exciting.
Okay, friends, if you did not hear part 1 with my interview with Susan Tree, please do yourself and your kids a favor and go back and listen. And if you did, you can see the wisdom that she just exudes every time she speaks. In part 2 of our interview, Susan will talk about some of the most memorable essays that she read as an admissions counselor. She'll also share how so many students write a good first half of their essay, and she explains why, and more importantly, why so many students' essays go downhill in the second half. Then she shares her views on whether there are certain topics that should be avoided altogether when you're selecting a topic to write your essay. And then finally, Susan will talk about some personal, compelling experiences. Next, Susan talks about how your personal, compelling experiences relate to your essay. And finally, Susan shares some exercises that she uses when she's helping people develop their individual narrative. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So I want to get your thoughts. This is hot off the press. As you know, I attended an event last night with 6 admissions deans from huge, big state schools, some of the biggest schools in the country, to a small liberal arts school in one case. And one of the deans said his most memorable essay was a student who he compared his life to an ice cream bar, and he had moved 10 times. And so he sort of chronicled these 10 moves and somehow related it to this ice cream bar. And so the question I have for you about that is, how important is it that you feel there's a hook or not a hook? Because sometimes people can feel they need to get gimmicky.
Yeah. Gimmicks usually don't work, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the ice cream bar, I'd love to read that essay because right off the bat, I think it sounds like a gimmick that would not. But you know what? One of the best essays I read years ago, the title of the essay was called My Hamster Bob. No kidding. It was from a kid from a rural high school in New England. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm about to read about this guy's relationship with his hamster. And it is one of those extremely memorable essays because really what it was about was this young boy. He was probably 8 or 10 years old. I don't remember. Somehow he inherited this hamster and he was very pleased. And the hamster's name was Bob, and Bob gave birth, which was a surprise because he thought Bob was a boy. And Bob giving birth to baby hamsters was the beginning of this boy's entrepreneurial hamster baby business, which then funded most of his college education.
Wow.
I know, it was a stunning essay.
Yeah, you're going to remember that one.
Well, he got me, there's a literary device called putting the reader there. And I can go on record right now saying that 90% of the essays that I read, maybe more, that I'm reading this year start with a story because somebody has told teenagers all around the world to start their essay with an engaging story rather than launching right into the autobiography, right? So that's being done. Everybody got that email, apparently. So way back when, Bob was the story, and it was engaging enough, and it only went on for 4 sentences before he got into the, finding his inner entrepreneur and becoming the purveyor of hamsters to pet stores. And he was very careful to say he never sold them to labs, and he never sold them for hamster meat or whatever, because I was thinking, oh no, this sounds good for the boa constrictors of the world, but not for Bob's offspring. But, he thought they were such wonderful pets, and he ended up with this phenomenal business. And the moral of the story was, here's how I'm paying for my college education, and my parents are very happy, but also look for opportunity in the small things. That don't look for glamour. Look for those small incremental opportunities in your life that come your way and make the most of them. And it was wonderful. And he was not a particularly great writer, that high school did. But it was sincere, and he knew what he wanted to communicate. And I learned a lot about his life in his rural community while I was doing it, and the structure of his family. So there you go.
You know what I find, Susan? Because I'm a big advocate of storytelling. I think that, I'm always saying to people, show it, don't tell it. And the mind is a picture gallery. And it, I remember in graduate school, in theological school, and I'm being told that even adults, the whole world is saying, just like a kid, tell me a story. So I do think there's power in story and emotionally power. But what I see too many students do, and I'm curious how much you see this, that they start telling this story, and it starts out and it's kind of interesting because we do like to hear a good story. But then it's almost like they just tell a story and they miss the part of connecting the story to their life.
Yes.
And I see a lot of that, and then it ends up falling flat. It's like, okay, that was a nice story, but what did it have to do with you? Do you see that a lot? Because I see that a lot with the students I work with.
Well, if we only read the first half of most college essays, we would be very impressed. Because you're right, high school students are being trained to write an eye-catching story, which is inviting the reader to come into their experience. And then most of them don't know what to do with it.
Yes. Yeah.
And the second half of the essay is a drag, and it never delivers. So a great example is, as I mentioned, I've been reading these applications from Texas. Well, if you lived in Houston, I know what you went through, right? Last year, I know the devastation of that hurricane and what it did to that whole part of the country. So there were a lot of there were a lot of essays this year that take a swipe at the hurricane story, but then turn it very quickly into a metaphor that ends up, the kind of I've overcome adversity metaphor, without ever talking about what their family went through and what that actually meant to their structure and their experience of their culture and their schooling, and who was worse off than they were, who was better off. And I think somebody in Texas, as well as somebody in the Southeast, said, whatever you do, don't write about hurricanes this year. Or if you do, use it only as the quickest intro into blah, blah, blah. Because I'm left, I know the trauma that a lot of these people went through, but it's just like when somebody says, oh, here are the 3 essay topics. Don't ever write about, death.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. What are your thoughts on that? Because, you'll hear that, right? Don't ever write about the getting injured and scoring the winning goal, or your overseas trip and how it changed your life, or, what are your thoughts? Do you say, no, it's okay to write about it? It depends how you develop it. Or would you say, no, admission officers are human, and if they've read the same thing over and over and over again, the bar's just going to be that much harder for you to stand out? I think both can be true, but I'd like to know your thoughts.
Well, first of all, there are no bad topics. There are only bad essays.
Yes.
Let me say that again.
I have to say something on this. So I had this, it was another college counselor, and she called me in and she's like, Mark, I'm really upset. And she's telling me this about this student, and she thinks very highly of him. And then she said, do you know that he wrote his essay on football? and so she was really disappointed when I said, I don't see any problem with writing it on football. It just depends what he says.
Of course.
but from her standpoint, it was not a sophisticated topic enough that demonstrated his intellectual prowess just by the topic alone. And I could not have disagreed with her more, but it sounds like we agree on that.
Oh, well, I think that's stifling to say to high school students that, either here's the list of things you should never write about, and then the poor kid is sitting there saying, well, that's the only profound thing that's ever happened to me that I can use to talk about my background and my family and my culture, right? If I'm not allowed to write about coming of age, or I'm not allowed to write about how athletics lifted me out of low self-esteem, then I'm sunk. So you can't do in the kids before they have a chance to say. One of the best essays I read this year was about football. I'll admit I like sports essays because I find that kids have a level of comfort and they can be compelling when they write about their own vivid experience. And that's one of the first pieces of advice I would give to anybody who's listening today is, if a topic is compelling to you, right? And if you have a lot of vivid emotions and descriptors around a topic, it's going to be more compelling to the reader.
Yeah, Karis, our listeners regularly know we talk openly, Nika and I, about our kids. So Karis ended up writing her essay on an experience that she had in Honduras. And people would say, that's so trite and hackney. That's the most overused essay. But I mean, she was just passionate about her overseas trips. She went to Honduras 5 times before she was 19. Yeah,
that's right.
And twice she went to Kenya. And so this is who she was. And if you want to see where her heart beats, I felt it would have been a disservice for her to just have eschewed that topic because admission officers are so tired of that topic.
That's
and we agree on that. And different people will say different things on that. But you hear different advice from different people, but it looks like we're on the same page on that. I want to ask you. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, the thing is the vehicle for telling the story is much less important than the story. The messaging is what matters. And if your vehicle is something that someone is telling you, the joke about death, dogs, and divorce, don't write about the 3 Ds, or the mission trip or the whatever. It's not going to, the topic itself doesn't win or lose you points. It's what you have to say about it. But if it's compelling and vivid to you as a teenager, you're going to write a more compelling and vivid essay rather than choosing something that feels more whatever, pedestrian or more intellectual. I'm all for intellectual. If you're a genuine intellectual at the age of 17, go for it. Write an intellectual essay. I've read some of those at Westtown from kids who truly were budding theorists and intellectuals, but that's a rare breed. And it was great that they wrote that kind of essay. But your essay has to have your personality in it. Like Karis, her passion, her understanding of people, her willingness to get her hands dirty. Those are the things that came through her writing because that for her, that was probably the most defining experience of her life.
Definitely.
Right. And, the boy that wrote about football this fall that I admired so much I never found out if he won or lost the game. What he wrote about was the harassment in the locker room. And when he came into high school as a 9th grader, his first experience of older boys saying, well, this is, how you become a man, and the beginning of hazing. And he had to eventually choose whether he was going to fight it, leave the team. So he had 3 options, and he discussed all 3. I can just turn my back and leave football behind, or I can stay here and fight it and potentially risk, a lot. Or I can shut up and say nothing. And he talked about the struggle in his conscience and how he talked to a youth leader, actually, about how to find his way through this. He's only 19 for people. They're at 9th grade. He's 14 or 15. So there was a great football essay, but it wasn't about being hoisted to his teammates' shoulders and, being carried off on his way to, the emergency room or whatever. But, you do have to look for deeper meaning. and then use the story to unpack that.
Yeah, and I'd like to read a quote to you. It's another quote that I really like by Robin Mamlet, who you know, a longtime admissions dean at Stanford Swarthmore and multiple stints at other places, Sarah Lawrence Occidental and others. And I love this quote. It says, even more than impressive than test scores or great transcripts or fantastic essays, colleges are looking for authenticity, not the appearance of authenticity, not the packaging of authenticity, not the strategy of authenticity, just authenticity, plain and simple. So why is that? If they detect any exaggeration or pretense or packaging, how do they know which parts of the application are real? And the reason why I wanted to read that is because sometimes students I work with, in fact, I'm thinking of a student right now, said very recently, says, I don't have this incredible story of like being homeless. And so they're tempted to embellish. Is there anything you want to say about anything I shared there?
Well, it's very, very, very moving because, I think there are a lot of teenagers in this country who feel they have lived very ordinary lives, and they equate ordinary with dull and uninteresting rather than ordinary, which is, maybe that means their families aren't suffering, but neither are they affluent. They're kind of ordinary. They're kind of in the middle of everything. And they feel, I know I felt that way, and I was far from it. I was a city kid applying to rural colleges. Everybody probably stopped and said, oh, wow, look at this, the city kid. And I just thought I was, chopped liver, as the expression goes. So I think the best thing you can do in trying to find your inner authenticity is talk to people who know you, and say, talk to, like one adult who's not related to you, one adult who is related to you, and one age mate, one peer, and ask them the same questions, like 4 questions. I did this as an assignment at my school for a while, and it was kind of interesting, and say to them, if you were my agent, what's the story you would tell to represent me? What aspects of your knowledge of my life would you say make me who I am? And you'll get a different response from a parent or a sibling than you will from maybe someone who's worked with you at the grocery store or in your church community or something, and you will from a peer. And then you have to put those together and figure out what feels like it's right to you.
So that's the first question, right? If you were my agent, what are the other 3? Because it sounds like there were 4.
Well, no, it would be the 4 things they would say.
I see. You. Well, 4 things would you say to identify? And
let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 60 is the book College Essay Essentials by Ethan Sawyer. Now, I've read this book, and I really like how it leads a student to really do some introspection into their background to help them to discover what has shaped them into becoming the person they are today. I also like that it doesn't stop there, but it transitions and shows the student how to convey their aspirations. Now, Ethan is more known as the college essay guy. Ethan studied screenwriting at Northwestern, and he's taken his understanding of how to tell a story, and he applies it to the craft of how to tell your personal story in a way that makes your writing come alive while being true to who you really are. There are a few things I like about Ethan Sawyer, besides the fact that he's good at what he does. First, he is someone who has proven to me that he is in this business for the right reason, to help students, and not just make money. Secondly, he has a real passion for his work, and he's always trying to hone his craft. Ethan also has a tremendous resource called the collegeessayguide.com, where he offers a number of excellent free resources. So for the first time, our recommended resource for episode 60 are actually 2 resources. Ethan's book, College Essay Essentials, and Ethan's website, collegeessayguide.com. We'll now return to part 2 of my interview with Susan Tree. And who do you let's say, because this is a very common question. I was about to ask you this and you kind of answered it sort of already, which is, I know I encounter lots of people, and I can't imagine how many times you encountered this in your 27 years, where people would say, I get it. I need to write about myself. I need to tell my story. I don't know where to start.
Right.
and they're just frozen. Like, where do I even start? So this, I'm sure, is one of the ways you help to, bring that out of what's already inside, right?
That's right.
Is by using others or others around them who know them.
Right, to reflect.
And
to reflect back.
Yes.
Like, it was,
and so who have you found is good to do? It sounded like you said a parent, a peer, and what was it? Who else did you have in there?
An unrelated adult.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be like a camp counselor, or it could be someone
right
a lot younger than a parent, but who is unrelated.
Who knows them though?
Right, but who
knows them?
Peer. So a camp counselor, or an employer, or a youth group leader, a college student. One of my students at Westtown went to an old babysitter who was 6 years older, but they'd maintained a friendship. And in these little interviews, or even if they're done, on the phone or by email, or it was an assignment that paid off for the students that I worked with. There are a few things though, Mark, that I think teenagers can do as they may say this so that this is too broad, is there are ways to self-assess. One is by getting feedback from others. So, for example, I did a self-assessment exercise when I was in graduate school studying for my counseling degree. I can't even remember which class it was, but in the class, the professor said, we're going to construct this scenario, and then everyone in the class, you're going to place each other in a role. So the scenario ended up, I forget, it's silly, I can't remember exactly. It was either like a landing on a desert island, or a sinking ship, or something like that. But everybody placed me as a mediator, as a leader who led from the middle. Whereas we picked other people to do other roles, like the comforter, or the decision maker, or the analyst. And I remember, and I was 10 years out of college at this point. I walked away saying, I had no idea that people thought of me like that. I was stunned that people saw that as a kind of a natural area of giftedness for me. And that was a strength. I wish someone had said that to me. Maybe it wasn't around in my life earlier, but it helped me connect the dots on a lot of things in my self-image. So I tried, as a college counselor, I tried doing a lot of those things with teenagers so that they could get feedback about their strengths, their interests, their effect on other people, their role in the community. Now, granted, our school, Mark, did a pretty good job of that with kids got a lot more feedback than in what I would call a normal school, a day school and a school where people came and went. But, whether you're asking teenagers to journal in a focused way, or read essays, read compendia of essays written on various topics and talk about what they find compelling. One of the great resources that I used in essay development was the NPR radio show, This I Believe. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's been on for about 55 years on National Public Radio. I catch it every once in a while. It depends if their local station carries that particular show. But it's changing. I forget what the subtitle is. expressing belief one essay at a time. And people for all these years, 50 plus years, have been sending in short narrative essays to NPR, and they've been published on this in this website since there's been websites. And you can use this, I believe, website and read these short narrative essays. They're all about, I would say, 500 words on probably, they've been sorted into like 200 or 300 different topics. So you can look up death, divorce, and dogs. Now, these are not college essays. Nobody read these to get into a college. They tend to be, they feel some of them more like drafts, and others are highly polished. But I think they actually give a really amazing range of the kinds of stuff that we on the college level receive, from very unsophisticated, not proofread by anybody else, to very polished, ready for publication essays. But you can read by age, so you can read teenagers, or you can read old people, and topic. And I use this in our essay development classes to get kids to pick essays that they felt were particularly compelling. Essays that really, they couldn't put them down. They really spoke to them. They evoked some emotion in the reader. And I'm like, well, welcome to the job of college admissions. And it's a great exercise because you also can see where a lot of essays go nowhere. You know, where you say, oh, just one more paragraph and you could have written some good conclusion here, but it's not there. So that's pretty cool.
So how do you take someone, let's go back to your agent question. Let's say someone, goes through that exercise and then someone says, you're like an incredibly hard worker and you have this like natural curiosity and you don't quit when you get knocked down, you bounce back up. Let's just say that. And so how does someone go from there to starting to put something down on paper to tell a story?
Well, I think that's where you have to let your ideas run wild and do some generating of possible stories to get you started. And I used to do this with teenagers through a questionnaire. So this assignment actually would follow the age in question that you just brought up again. The self-assessment questionnaire, I asked juniors about, probably 30, 40 short questions. This was a writing exercise. So the first exercise was they interviewed people. The second exercise, this was a big one, where they had to write responses. And basically what they were doing was writing kind of like the thesis statement for 35 or 40 different essays. Meaning, what's your point? So I would ask them questions like, what would you like to change about yourself? My questions were split into two different categories. One, the first group was about goals and values. The second was about their education. The third was activities and interests. The fourth was the world around you. So that was worldview, right? And then the last one was personality and relationships. So I would go from, what would you most like to change about yourself? And if you had a year to go anywhere and do anything you wanted, how would you spend that year? Then I would shift into, what do you choose to learn about when you learn on your own? Can you identify a stimulating academic experience? Then it would go on to, when you have, free time, if you have free time, what do you tend to do? To the worldview, what's been the most controversial issue you've dealt with in high school? and how does it concern you? And then the personality and relationships, I would say, how do you describe your spiritual self? What's your most conspicuous shortcoming? What's your finest quality? So I only wanted a sentence, or I would say literally a sentence or two. You could write an essay about all of these questions, but I only wanted a sentence or two. So basically what I was asking them for was a topic sentence, as if they were going to write an essay. And once they worked their way through this, we gave them quite a while to do this, they would come up. It was almost like this was this was sparking what they wanted to write about. Because some of these questions, they put they could feel the energy welling up, that they really felt they had stuff to say. And others were just like a drag. I'm like, well, don't write your essay about that.
So how much, after they go through this, how much would they self-identify what energized them as they got in touch with themselves versus feedback from you or a peer or somebody else that felt like, wow, that was powerful what you said? Like, you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, well, at this point, with this self-assessment exercise, I didn't evaluate it. Although when we would be, because we were lucky enough to have a class format for college counseling with the juniors, we would just give them some time in class to talk, say aloud what they enjoyed writing about or what they felt was stupid. And then we would always split them into pairs and have them do some debriefing. And I don't know, the choice of topic, the actual story that's the entree, they began to see that as a different selection process than the content of the essay. Like if they decided what they needed to talk about was, for a student who'd grown up in a faith-based family, and they were 16 and suddenly started wrestling with their own buy-in to their family's faith history. That almost had to bubble up before they then could find the story that introduced that. It's kind of a chicken and the egg, which comes first. But often the struggle itself, not the hurricane, but the homelessness, the sense of loss, the emotional content had to come first, and then the story had to become that introduction.
Right. But what I'm getting at, though, with all that process, from your experience, how often did the student almost have an aha moment where they said, this is what I want to communicate? Because as they went through that exercise, they realized there was some passion there, versus somebody else, whether it was a parent or a peer or a teacher, someone else sort of ratified, like, wow,
right.
That's what I'm getting at, because sometimes I find students are kind of overwhelmed by everything. Like I would never do this when I was a student, but I've had multiple students say to me that they want to write multiple different essays and have me look at them. Like some students want to write all 7 prompts, which is crazy.
Right.
But I would never have been willing to do that kind of work, but God bless them. But I find that the narrowing down piece can be challenging for students. So what have you found is effective there? Is it more introspection, or is it communication with others and looking at what they put on paper? Is it journaling? Is it doing outlines? What have you found helps sort of take these ideas that are percolating and leads them in a direction of, this is what I want to say?
That's a really good question, Mark. And I think it's different for different kids based on their learning style. We all have what I would call an academic style or a learning style. Some of us are, very analytical. Some of us are very creative. Some of us love to write. We're very verbal. We have a comfort level with that. Some of us, it's agony. And I think the reason why teenagers benefit from a lot of these different exercises, and one of which I would say includes reading a lot of essays that other kids have written, is that every student will find his or her own inspiration. And for the kid that's going to write all 6 essays and bring them in and put them in front of you, and get feedback, I think that's great. There are other kids who can barely get one topic and one essay down. And, that's okay too.
Right.
That's, I remember sitting with my own children for whom this was and they were at a school that was very, very writing intensive. They were used to writing essays. They wrote lots of essays. But finding that topic and, all my daughter wanted to do was find something and get it over with. Right. So she got one idea for it. She's still the same way now. She's a sophomore in college and she gets one idea for a paper and you cannot shake her off of that. It's like, I found my topic. Everybody go away. Even if we don't think it's a great topic, that we know her well enough to say, go for it. More power to you. Whereas my son looks at 10 different things, writes 5 different essays, changes 3 of the endings. It's personal style. I don't think there's one model, and kids are going to find their inspiration where they find it. And parents have to let them do that. Parents, especially if you have had an older child who went through this, don't kind of push your next child into that mold. It may have worked for one and it may not work for the other.
In the news next week, 6 tips from college admissions pros on standing out. And we'll be in chapter 61 of 171 answers. And the title is What College Admissions Counselors Look For in a Personal Statement or Main Essay. And next week's question is from a mom who wants to know how to help her child make their final decision on which college to attend. And Mark continues with Miss Susan Tree in part 3 of Writing the Personal Essay. Don't miss your opportunity to fill in the gaps and bring yourself to life. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.